Good evening, everybody. I thought I'll quickly clarify some concerns that you had on task one. Few people actually have raised few concerns on task 1A, B, and C. As we will not have the opportunity to meet next week, let's try and clarify those important areas and then move on. So, if you uh, refer to the presentation slides that I shared last week on the assignment, you will see few important slides which will give you some basic guidelines. Now, going into the organization summary, which is task 1A, uh, remember I shared a specimen with you which I have done for Haley's Advantage, but that is just a very basic organization summary which was done for the previous assignment where the page count was just one, but here you have a page count limit of two, right? So you can go up to 2 pages. So you will have to elaborate most of those points. So if you look at the assignment brief, the examiner has given you the subtitles, so please do stick to the subtitles proposed by the examiner. So if you look at the organization summary, you have to start with the organization name, then give some important information related to the organization, such as the type of the company, size of the organization, products and services the organization offers, customer base, and competitors, right? So elaborate, just don't stick to the areas that I have highlighted in my summary. You can elaborate a little bit more, because you can go up to 2 pages, right? Then if you look at the stakeholders, you have the opportunity of plotting the stakeholders into a very basic stakeholder analysis. It can be a basic analysis like internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, or else you can use that linkage model, um, and plot your stakeholders based on a model. That's perfectly okay. But the concern was about the key customer segment and the theme chosen. So there were some queries about the key customer segment. Students were asking whether you have to talk about the customer segment that you selected for the assignment. Yes, you can't talk about all the segments. You have to zero in on a theme. Number one is you need to be very clear of the theme that you have selected, which can be customer loyalty, customer acquisition, new product or service, and consumer behavior. So you have to be the first thing that you need to do is select on the theme, right? And then the key customer segment that you want to select. So if you look at customer loyalty, building customer loyalty in which segment? Is it the millennials? Is it the elderly population? Is it the 20 to 35-year-old females living in Colombo? So likewise, you have to be a bit more specific. So the the key customer segment that is referred to in task 1A is the customer segment that you have selected. So you need to give an overview of the selected key customer segment and then move into the theme that you have chosen. When you do both these activities, make sure that you give a justification. Why did you select this particular customer segment? What's the rationale behind selecting this customer segment? And then the rationale behind choosing the theme that you have selected. So that has to stand out in task 1A, right? I'm sure you can elaborate more on these two areas, and then the other areas like the organization name, information, and stakeholders, you can limit uh, the elaboration and just keep it as a summary. But if you look at the last two elements, which is the key customer segment and the theme, you will have to give a justification, a rationale, so you will have to allocate some words there. Then moving on to task B, remember I went through the examiner's audio PowerPoint, and I briefed you the same thing last week. It has to be a literature review, right? You don't have to refer to the company much, but it has to be a literature review. The literature review is going to be centered around one thing, which is critically evaluating the importance of reputation to the theme that you have selected. So if you have selected customer loyalty, what you need to justify is how reputation would affect this theme of customer loyalty. How would reputation, how would identity, how would image affect acquisition of new customers, right? So that requires literature review. What I've done is, in the WhatsApp group, there was some links that were shared. So you can go to those links. Those links will tell you how reputation directly affects revenue generation. So if you talk about revenue generation, you can generate revenue through customer loyalty, retaining the existing revenues, and also acquiring new customers. So if you look at certain models, you can link those models into justifying reputation, how reputation affects the achievement of your theme. So that needs to be a literature review. You can talk about the chosen organization. You can talk about the chosen organization, but it has to be more of a literature review that you do related to the chosen organization. So you can, when you bring in a theory, say you talk about how reputation affects customer loyalty, bring in a literature, you can relate it to the company as well. That's okay, but the focus is going to be on the literature part, right? So I just thought of reiterating that point, which was repeated again by the examiner during her audio PowerPoint. So when you move on to task 1C, I think it's very clear. It talks about evaluating stakeholders. So you have to do a stakeholder analysis using a model like Mendelow's matrix or any other stakeholder analysis that you wish. Bring in literature model there to analyze your stakeholders. And the most important part is you need to list down these stakeholders, right? It can be an Excel sheet, it can be a table where you list down all your stakeholders, and you have to justify why those stakeholders fall into certain categories. Now, if you do Mendelow's matrix, you will say certain stakeholders are high interest, high power, some stakeholders are low interest, low power, right? So when you plot your stakeholders into those boxes, make sure in your table that you give a justification. Why does employees fall into low power, high interest, right? So that can be a statement, right? A justification as to why you have put certain stakeholders into certain quadrants. That can be one thing that you are trying to analyze. And then the next one is how will these stakeholders affect your organization's corporate reputation? How can employees affect your company's reputation, positively and negatively? Now remember, if you look at both task 1B and C, the key command word is critically evaluate. So when you say critically evaluate, you can talk about the pros and cons. So when you are, say, if I relate to task 1C, you can be very critical about how employees affect corporate reputation. You can say yes, they affect corporate reputation, but these can be the limitations. So it can be an argument. When you talk about task 1B again, you have to critically evaluate the corporate reputation. How would corporate reputation affect a theme that you have selected? So you can be critical about it. You can say yes, it affects the theme that you have selected, and you can be critical. You can say no, it doesn't. So be critical about both these two tasks, right? You don't have to agree always. You can disagree, you can build an argument. So I know that I've not briefed you on task 2 yet, so we will take it gradually, but what I want you to focus on task 2 is on task 2A, which you can actually start. It's a very practical thing that you have to do. If I read task 2A, it says critically evaluate the organization's current corporate strategy, structure, systems, and culture in relation to its positioning and reputation. Also, assessing the current gaps between image and identity. Recommend how this gap could be addressed to achieve the objective. So, forget about the second part. The second part says recommend how this gap can be addressed, right? You don't have to address that, but at least can you evaluate the organization's current reputation, right? If you guys can remember, in one of the presentations I showed you how the corporate reputation of Haley's was analyzed, right? So when you go into corporate strategy, right, you say you have to select a company, say you selected Haley's, and you have to analyze the corporate strategy of the company, right? What are the things you will look at? You will look at the vision, the mission, the goals, objectives, how planning is done, how strategy is derived, is it deliberate, is it emergent strategy? So there are various models that we discussed as to how strategy can be evaluated in a company. So you can now don't just talk about literature here. You have done